Okay, there is one problem we on Kali Tribune addressed always, something like on the margins of other subjects, and that's a subject that is current today and very rarely addressed. And it's a I would call it chronic problem in young people with articulation, especially in my experience with articulation in writing, as something we talked about already. Now we are talking about it publicly. My first encounter with it was when I started working as a high school teacher. I myself was very young at the time, I was in mid-20s, and it was a wonder to behold, because I never seen anything like it before. Not a great feat for such a young man, but it was something particularly notable. 18, 19 years old, or even older, when you go to faculty level, who are fairly intelligent, fairly articulated in their expression, fairly normal people. And when you give them the task to write down what they told you, they are the young people who are unable to not only express themselves in writing, express their thoughts, they are unable to construct sentences, literary to construct complex sentences, and they are completely aware of the problem when you point it out to them, but they don't know what it is about. And I think this is one of the problems that is completely ignored by, let's call them, proper authorities, at least in my country, but I'm sure that this is something Europe-wide, if we are to talk about Europe. And I think that there are some deep causes to this. This is not simply the matter of not being educated enough or trained in writing from very young age, because I remember when I was a kid, most of the kids I know were not very much into reading and writing, yet when need be, they would be able to pull it off. So there is something that came with spirit of the age in the, I would say, late 90s, at least in Croatia, late 90s to early noughties. Yeah. So I think this is very interesting subject and very rarely addressed. Definitely something we could try to figure out.
Yeah. And what was your experience, MIhai?
About what Branko said. Well, yes, I think this is something which is starting to be seen, especially from the generations which are coming from behind, so to say. I know some people like this, and for me, there is no question that it is about let's say the way of the way we communicate today and the way we gather our so-called information. And even this information gathering is itself problematic. But I pointed out, I think, on that comment, on Branko's podcast, I pointed out this phenomenon of memes, and how you take whatever subject, whatever topic, no matter how complex it is, and you put on a picture and 2 lines of text in which you take it into derision, probably, and you get this impression that you understand everything that there is to understand about this. So that is a huge problem, and I think it creates some sort of mental patterns which are very destructive in the long run. Because even if I see this especially with the reaction to this problem. The reaction is the same as the thing it tries to combat. They try to fight memes with other memes. For example, Branko, I'm sure you have seen this with the alt-right and your experience with this thing.
Yes, the alt-right made the utmost of memes, and they even had some theories about memes. And you have a meme theory in military sense. I remember reading some documents some times ago about using memes as a mean of psychological warfare. I wouldn't go too far and now go in some kind of analyzing that maybe roots of this meme flood on the internet is something that's coming from some shadowy sources. I wouldn't go that way. But I think that memes kind of like dovetail on the very nature of internet and the intellectuality that is based on internet. Now, MIhai had one idea in one of his articles that was on a completely different subject, but it caught my eye, about reading. Difference of reading the book, that is a physical book, and difference of reading a PDF document. So, at the first glance, it should be the same thing. So you are reading, you are connecting sentences, finding meanings. It should be the same thing. But he argued, for instance, that it's not the same thing because the book and the PDF document are not the same thing. That is, the very material construction is so different that probably the process of understanding would be completely different.
I used to think, I wondered, was that because of the backlit text that and the digital refresh rate, that it affects different parts of your brain than if you're reading text off paper? You know, it's completely, you see, the thing is that when you handwrite, the parts of the brain that light up are completely different and much more complex than if you type. So if you read off a screen with the, you know, the refresh rate, etc., perhaps the parts of the brain that are affected are completely different than when you read off a page.
Well, like I said, I even heard of studies done about this, and they said that it is a completely different effort to write by hand and to read a handwritten text than it is to type something or to read something which has been typed.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two different things, and of course, this is some modern notion, but you know, the conclusion of that those tests which were done, those experiments, that is that you know, it improves your IQ. I would say it perhaps develops further your mental capacities when you write or you read a text which was handwritten.
Yeah, they say that, I've been reading some studies, they say that the actual writing, the physical act of writing, enables a thinking process. So, for example, including the word although in the middle of a sentence, for example, enables one to evolve an idea in the middle of a sentence, whereas not using conjunctions like and, if, but, although, and all those things like that means that thinking remains quite simplistic. And this is what they've actually found in education. Because what you were talking about earlier, Branko, about why did this happen? There was some indication I came across that it came from this idea of teaching language in this method called whole language, instead of going back to teaching the very basic building blocks of language like phonics, which became unfashionable because it involved rote learning and strict instruction. So then instead, in the 70s and 80s, they began to introduce into education curriculums this idea of creativity and emotional self-expression. And so this actually meant that children kept journals, and the idea was that they were to be allowed to express themselves. But because there was a complete absence of grammatical training, which we also missed some of it, you know, because it's been going on for 50 years. They have found that children are unable to, you know, with phonics, what you would do is, say you were learning the word boat, you would actually learn b, b, o, o, o. And initially you're not actually learning a sense of meaning, you're learning the recognition of symbols, you know. And they're actually beginning to find now, just in the very last few years, 2 or 3 years, that it's better to go back to the old strict grammatical teaching, which became despised because it was considered, it inhibited children's freedom. I think that's very interesting.
Oh yes, it is. Not only that, but the problem is what this points out to me as an ex-teacher, and teaching was my vocation. I really took it seriously. What I understood is that people who should be in charge of this are not even noticing this as a problem. And the moment when you would have to start to address this problem, this would mean reverting on a whole lot of stuff, of totally turning things around. And this would mean completely, maybe even return to a different kind of upbringing of children, which is, on the other hand, very hard to achieve now, because children are, least of all, formed in school. Everybody talks about how school is important and so on. School is the least thing that really informs you, makes you grow up. And I don't know how this could be changed, because we are all under the programs of European Union. All our countries are to some extent obliged to live up to those European Union standards. Those standards are going into complete opposite direction. Now, when you teach children something that they can't understand, but they have to know as a building blocks, you had to pummel it into them.
You do and you don't, because I did homeschool my children and I had to teach them all how to read. And actually, for some crazy reason, I have no idea how it ended up that way, I actually used the phonics method, which is the old-fashioned method. So we used to use blackboards and magnetic letters and stuff like that. And we would go through, all the sounds, instead of this forming a creative idea of what does the word mean, So it was quite a strict way. But because I think the essential thing is you read with children from a very young age, which I actually think people don't do anymore. And when you read with children, you have to put your hand underneath the word or your finger underneath the word, and they have to follow it by sight like that, and they hear the sounds. And it's a much different thing than reading off a screen or... But I understand what you're saying about the strictness, that perhaps there has to be more strictness.
Strictness in the widest sense, because discipline, they have to discipline themselves, and kids cannot do that by themselves. And this idea that a little child has to be first and foremost given opportunity to express himself. They are not looking for expression. They are not looking to their parents to be their friends, or their teachers to be their friends. I mean, just for the record, I was never a strict teacher. I was famous for not being strict, but that was because I was teacher of subjects that were not of prime importance for academic curricula. They were preparing themselves for faculties, so I never wanted to bludgeon philosophy or logic into my students when nobody will ask them about it afterwards. They had a lot to do with mathematics and such things. And interestingly enough, speaking of Croatian schools, from this war of independence we had and this post-Yugoslavia, post-communism Croatia, the quantity of curricula is always on increase, and the kids end up knowing less. This is something that always fascinated me. It seems that there is some correlation there, because they push too much on them, and in some respect they expect them to cover all kinds of different disparate fields, but in the sense that they can master this only by teaching themselves to learn by heart things, not understanding, and they just forget it when they go further. And things like writing, they don't teach them that, because this cannot be applied in this sense. The thing with writing is, and this is something that took me a long time to understand, in writing you are alone. So it's not like conversation. It is a kind of conversation, but it is a conversation with yourself. And this is what scared me when I understand this, that young people that can seem very self-confident, very pragmatic, have a huge problem of being alone by themselves. And one of the symptoms would be this inability to write. I think it goes very deep, and this meme thing. I mean, memes are the word meme. I think that Dawkins came out with that term. This is understood as some kind of mental virus. It is a contradictory concept because he understood, as far as I understand that guy at all, he considers memes to have life in themselves, that they are some kind of creations that then go on and exist and act like viruses, which is nonsense because memes are not subsistent, they are not beings, though. Those are pictures, images made by men with some words. But people understand them in that way and use them in that way. And sure enough, the idea is that they should infect you. You are not supposed to understand the meme, you are supposed to be infected by meme. And alt-right, for instance, use them to that effect. And anyway, a lot of people around the Donald Trump campaign that were not strictly Donald Trump campaign employees, but those mass of people that supported him relied a lot of memes on memes.
I don't really know that much about memes, but it's not something that's just used by the alt-right, is it?
No. It is used on a general level in today's society, today internet-based society. And
is it not meant to convey like an ironic "I know everything" sort of an idea?
Well, yes. For example, I remember this stupid meme. I think it was at the beginning of memes when this phenomenon started. It was about Christianity. It says that Christianity is about a cosmic Jewish zombie who rescued or who by dying rescued a woman who ate from a tree or something like this. And the conclusion was makes perfect sense. So with a few lines, you practically demolished, 2,000 years of patristic tradition and liturgies and so on. So yes, it comes from this attitude. We have evolved, we have gone past this. We know everything. You cannot fool us today because all the information is at our fingertips, and I think this is where it is coming from. This sort of attitude.
That sort of attitude infects everything, doesn't it?
Yes, this is why I said that even those who are realizing this and are trying to get away from this state of affairs, they are having problems because they themselves use the same means to try to escape, and of course that is no real escape. You're just using the same thing but from a different angle. And this doesn't provide anything.
By that you mean using the same medium, the internet?
Not. I don't mean necessarily the internet, but the same kind of attitude. For example, there are a lot of people, who are doing stuff about religion on the internet. They're writing, they're speaking about this, and they themselves are starting this sort of topic with the same kind of attitude, with this know-it-all attitude. I have read everything, I know everything, you cannot tell me that I'm wrong because I know I'm right. And this is, yes, of course, we have one example, me and Branko, whom we know very close, but what I'm trying to say is that the internet itself, the medium, I don't think it is a proper medium for some of these complex topics. I don't think you can do philosophy in a proper manner on the internet. As much as you try to. It is not about your intentions and not about philosophy itself. It is about the medium. I think that the mediums are not neutral. It matters through what you transmit something. It is one thing to transmit something in person, to talk to someone in person in the real presence, and a completely other thing to talk like we are talking right now on Skype. Of course, besides the technical problems with the lags and the dropouts and so on. But even so, it is right now. It seems like we are having, let's say, a personal conversation. We see each other on a screen, we are talking, we hear each other in real time, but in reality, you know, there is always this plastic wall, you know, which is preventing a real personal communion in this sense.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Yes, this is a thing, and I think that if somebody chooses to relay knowledge through internet, he has to pay a lot of attention to preparation of what he's doing and what is the scope that he can encompass with his work. Because one of the things that are extremely, well, how should I say, accommodating to internet are these conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm.
Because conspiracy theories existed long before the internet. But the problem is that the form of standard conspiracy theory is the form of many elements tied up into perfect system that is completely explanatory. And this is the holy grail of this networked knowledge, because the idea is that knowledge is a resultant of infinitesimal number of elements that all come together perfectly, that function together. That's a systemic knowledge. Whereas knowledge in the sense of metaphysics, and not only metaphysics, but knowledge in general, a real knowledge, is always the relationship between a whole and the parts, where the whole is in fact the first and the parts come later. We as human beings start learning partially, but the thing we are learning is in itself one whole, towards which we are trying to achieve it in some sense. And there are even some moments maybe when it can be disclosed to you for some reason, but not by efforts of learning. It cannot be, I think, done in that way. And internet can give you an illusion that you are having this. It really can give you this illusion. And what fascinated me is how it responds to your queries. Not only in the sense that Google has good algorithms, but I noticed that people, when they go down this path of delusion, that they somehow, through their study, realized what is going on in the world, why is it going on, what are the causes of this, even going thousands of years back, how they start to discover things that reinforce this belief of theirs. They start to find the clues at every corner, and they tend to call it synchronicity sometimes. And I think this is the epitome of delusion. This is when you think that you climbed so high that you have a bird's view, for instance, on your own life, or even on the history as a whole, but in fact you are completely losing ground. You are drowning in information.
It's possible that the algorithms, which tend to become they tend to become linked to our searches and our internet history. It's possible that the algorithms are actually contributing to this idea of synchronicity.
Mm-hmm. It's one level, of course. This is this surface level, but I suspect this goes deeper. I cannot really explain it. It really resembles some kind of black magic. I mean, I can't use any more scientific word, because let's say rational word, because it is uncanny. I think uncanny is the right word to describe it. And this is what people call what is called the reality tunnel. That is when you become enabled to see reality as structuring and organizing itself around you in correspondence to your inner states. Nevertheless, this is the illusion, and this proves to be illusion for people who experience this, because they start to, for somebody looking from outside, it is obvious that they are losing ground. But I think at some terminal points, when people really go deep into this, they go into complete mental disorder. But this mental disorder would not be some kind of darkening of mind by not understanding anything, but darkening coming from overload of consciousness, of information, of overload of information. And I think that whereas you are right to say that to a large extent search engines do this by their algorithms, I think this goes even deeper. And I would say the cause that deepens this is something that is not in technology but in man using technology, something that was maybe provoked by this technology and empowered, because this technology gives this urge an expression, this urge to overpower everything by your own intellect, by your own, let's say, knowledge.
Okay.
And this is a very hard to. I wrote about it in few instances. For instance, there was this phenomenon of on the alt-right. They had this kek, this frog god that I think that guy Jordan Peterson also likes. That was uncanny for me. They are convinced that they conjured the god that inaugurated Donald Trump into office. Now, I for myself, I took this pretty seriously. I don't claim to understand. Something at work there that is rather new phenomena, which we don't still understand. It is not something you can satisfactorily explain with these internet algorithms, that those people are just deluded by internet. They are deluded by something deeper.
I think I'm not quite fully grasping what you're saying. I understand the desire. You're saying that people have this desire to be like all-powerful intellectually, and that the internet gives them this scope to have a lot of information. But I'm not exactly sure. Are you sort of suggesting like that the internet is like an extension of the human nervous system or something that...
No, I'm saying that internet is a technology that gave people an opportunity to really delude, some people at least, to really delude themselves into this all knowledge state, that they are really understanding everything, that they are really making the world correspond to their wishes. I think that internet is a medium in which they invested their intention, their effort, intellectual evolutional effort, and that this intention got locked into it. And I'm not thinking about nervous system. I'm not thinking about it in the material categories. That's
okay.
what I want to say.
Yeah.
Because intention is not material. I don't consider intention to be material. It operates through body to some extent, but it is not the body in itself. I think the thing that gets imprisoned into this carousel of images and information is something that is deeper than nervous system. That is the soul, because the soul would be the capacity of man that can be projected, that can reflect back into itself, because it is not material. And in that sense, this thing, I think, goes deeper. It goes deeper than simply being on bad trip, because when you're on bad trip, once you are cleansed, you clean the acid from your system, you are bound to be okay if you don't overdo it. But once your will and your mind and all those powers that are not physical got enthralled and trapped, what can you do then? Because something your very inner being is invaded to some extent, and because we don't know that much about this. That is, I'm talking now about things that are not object of science for hundreds of years now, 200 or 300 of years. We have to recur to means of understanding this, to, let's say, to some past times, previous ages when those things were studied to a large extent, and to our own insight. But I think that this is very dangerous thing. I saw, to give you an example, because this is getting a bit abstract. I saw people being drowned into their own world image of the world they constructed, and at some point this world image for them became completely real. They thought they have explanation for everything that is going on. And that was something that was obvious to me. For instance, when Donald Trump won the election, there were people who thought that this is the end times in some sense, but otherwise intelligent people. I'm not talking about some I don't know, Christian dispensationalist from southern USA or something like that, but to that moment normal people, but all of a sudden they got warped totally. And this is something I think that is first thing, it is novel. I don't think this is something that could happen 20 years ago. So it's a new phenomena. This is probably the reason why I am wrestling with concepts. I'm trying to understand it myself. I'm not sure what it is, but to sum it up, I'm not sure that it's merely the question of internet algorithms predicting what you want. I think this goes deeper, and it is far deeper than technology. It's something that is in human being, in his soul.
MIhai, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I actually have been thinking about this while Branko was talking. Well, first, to start off with a joke, I think all these lags and dropouts are the result of some internet god being angered by our conversation here.
Yeah.
So he's trying to screw it up for us. About this internet, the internet is, of course, also created by men. So in this sense, it must correspond to a certain part of his psyche, of the individual psyche and the collective psyche as well. This phenomena, like synchronicity, which Branko was talking about, for someone who was a little bit involved with the occult, with occultism, I can say that there is a clear, not only analogy, but even an identity between this synchronicity, which is happening in these conspiracy theory circles, and certain, let's say, certain experiences and certain mentalities which are present in occultism. I don't know if you have been or you knew people who are involved, for example, with the tarot system. Now, there are things happening there which are, like Branko said, very uncanny. And it is this thing, from a certain point of view, you get things out of it which are totally real, but at the same time, you always have this, let's say, underground current, this small thought at the back of your mind that something is not quite right there. It is a combination between illusion and reality, and you're not really sure which is one. You have guys like Aleister Crowley, for example. Some people call him a charlatan, others call him a genuine occultist, others call him something in between. No, I think he's a combination of all. He was also a charlatan, he was also an illusionist, and he was also producing real phenomena by his crafts. And I think that these things with the reality tunnel and the synchronicity, that some people conjure up different theories and then go on to find evidence that these theories are actually correct. This is something which can also be found in occultism. It is like you go out every day and you see a mirror of yourself in your life wherever you look. And also you start conjuring up all sorts of weird ideas. For example, when I was involved in those circles, I saw people I saw this guy who actually thought that by some ritual of his, and he was very, very serious about this, that he generated or he started Armageddon. Not Armageddon, sorry, it was a Norse thing. He started Ragnarok. So he was convinced that
That's
yes,
cool.
the second I mentioned Ragnarok.
Wow, it's good.
I'm not gonna say controversial words again.
Okay.
On this podcast.
But you are going to have to start there just after the idea of this guy thought he was conjuring Ragnarok.
No, don't say it. Don't say it. Okay. Yes. Yes, that's one example. Another example was this girl. You know, she was pretty messed up from what I gathered, but she thought that through a curse of hers, she caused this massive earthquake in New Zealand. And I of course I'd never really gone that down this line so low, but you know, I had actually had a similar experience once with the tarot, you know, with that nuclear explosion in Fukushima in 2011. You know, I thought I had predicted that on that very day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very weird. You know, it was definitely something which I cannot call a coincidence, because I don't think there is such a thing as a coincidence, but it was also something very uncanny. You know, it was the type of experience, you know, which just makes you feel amazed, but it doesn't transform you in any way. You know, it is not beneficial in any way for your being. You know, it is just like a show, you know, like a spectacle, nothing of substance. And I think this is what is. I have made this parallel between these phenomena in occultism and what is happening with these people who, by Googling online information and unearthing all sorts of material, they think that they are doing this grand theory, you know, of history, of the universe, of how things are made, and so on. So it is a thing, I think, an area for a serious study. You know, this connection between the internet and whichever part of our psyche it affects, because it is inevitable. Whatever we create, whatever idea we invent, it is also part of us, because we never start from scratch, from nothing. We cannot create out of nothing. We create out of pre-existing material, and those materials are found both in the external world and in us. You know, we're putting something of ourselves in whatever we invent. So there is no surprise there.
When you mention, I do agree with MIhai on this, and I do think that this occult, and I mean, I downright written this, that I do take seriously when those people say that they are practicing chaos magic and invoking the god frog. I take that very seriously also, and I think that this is the real delusion. This is not delusion or illusion in the sense that they are fooling themselves, but they are really creating insubstantial reality for themselves, because you can have something like insubstantial reality that only seems to be reality. It all depends on what you understand to be reality. I, for myself, don't think that reality is essentially a material, kind of like system of material things that are related together. I think that it is something much deeper. And these people, I think, managed to get themselves into a position to create for themselves a kind of like movie in which they are living. And this, let's call it movie or kaleidoscope, has a real influence on them and real influence on the things that happen in the world. But nevertheless, it is illusory, because it is untrue. It is not substantial. It is empty. And what I was meaning to say, the most important thing, this what MIhai said. The point with memes is that this occultist experiments that kids used to do in times before, used to do with Ouija boards or tarot or such things, are now happening on mass scale, because they are doing it like mass. It's not 5 kids together trying to throw tarot cards. It's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of internet users doing such thing. And so it has a potential. Indeed, this potential already had an effect of sucking in a lot of people. So,
sorry to interrupt you there, but I remember I told you something last year about that thing, Mandela Effect. You know,
yeah.
Do you know, Deirdre, this thing about Mandela?
I've heard of it. Like it changes what happened in the past or something. Is it?
Yes, you know it. How it started. Some woman, I think, a blogger, practically. You know, she was convinced that Nelson Mandela, died somewhere in the 1980s. And she was convinced that she saw funeral images with from his funeral and so on. And then she was surprised that he just died in 2009, I think. I can remember, but you know, she didn't think anything of this until she met other people who also had the same impression, that Nelson Mandela died in the 1980s, and they thought that they saw images from his funeral and all that. From this, you know, this term was invented, the Mandela Effect, the theory being that history is changing as we speak. So we remember some things and then find out that the way they happened has changed. So not that we remember wrongly, but they themselves have changed. You know, it's like, I don't know, you think you remember that they discovered some new continent, and then you find out that they didn't discover anything. But it is not that you remembered wrongly that they discovered something. They really discovered, and then this reality has changed, and we have a new history. But so this idea, of course, is absurd. But this whole thing is exploded, and I saw that you know, they did this for all kinds of trivial stuff. Like they remember that the package for Kit Kat, the chocolate, you know, was different, that between Kit and Kat there was a dash, but now they see that there isn't, so the package has morphed. Or they remember that We Are the Champions from Queen ended up with a different line, and you know, it is just crazy. I saw this guy once that he was convinced that something was amiss because he served some drink at a restaurant, And then 1 year later, they told him that they never had that drink on the menu. So
it's funny. It's reminding me now. Could be completely off the wall, but you know the Hermetic principle of, I don't know the word, mentality, or all is mind. Do you know that Hermetic principle?
Yes. Yes.
All is mind, and to a certain extent, one could say that yes, all is mind. You know, just as you were saying earlier on, Branko, about that you don't believe that everything is material, you know, and you were also talking about, MIhai, about how these experiences, these occult experiences are real, but they do happen, but they may not have the substance that we think that they have. But then again, if you attribute mentally to them a bigger substance, then they actually do have substance, you know, in a way.
They do. I would only try to give it a precise definition. They act. They can act. They can influence, but they are not substantial. Because by substantial, I mean being real in unqualified sense. Because something can be real in qualified sense. For instance, a lie has some kind of reality.
Mm.
For instance, in Plato's dialogue Sophist, you have MIhai is working on it right now, reading it. You have this attempt where Plato tries to demonstrate where sophists are wrong, and sophists were groups of people in ancient Greek in times of Socrates and Plato that were traveling teachers. They were teachers of rhetorics, but their guiding principle was that you have to teach people to argue well and win arguments absolutely with no recurse to truth or false. It's only winning. Let's say, somewhat simplified definition, this is how Plato would define sophist. And Plato tries to demonstrate not how is it possible that everything is a lie, or that something, or that lie can be sold as truth. But he tries to explain how the sophists pull off the trick that everything is truth. Because sophistic principle is that everything is equally true. And now Plato goes into this. And he, to cut long story short, the idea is that lie is a saying for what is that it is not, or what is not to say that it is. If I say, for instance, that nobody, people listening to this cannot see us, so I say, I don't know, Deirdre is blonde, which is not true. Did I say nothing, or did I say something? It is some kind of something, elusive kind of something. I addressed something that is other than what is, because the fact that is that you are not blonde. It's a brown head. And the lie or illusion would be to heteron, Plato calls it, the other of the true. And it has some kind of borrowed reality. Now, this may seem a bit odd at the first sight, but it is not. This is what we deal in everyday life, in fact. And we are always trying to, if we are in the pursuit of truth, if we are trying to be honest in very mundane things of everyday life, we are trying to always come to grips with what is, to say precisely about something. What is it? Is it this, what people are saying that it is? But this other thing that we call a lie is also some kind of being, but the being that kind of like obfuscates. It has a borrowed existence. It is a parasite on truth. Okay. This is illusion. So it is not completely unreal. And in this metaphysical sense, to lift it a bit higher, take Plato, Aristotle, to be academic for a second. Both of them didn't consider reality to be physical in the sense of matter as is understood today. Some people who are not well versed in philosophy consider that Aristotle was a realist. He was a realist, but in a quite different sense than materialist, because his notion of matter is that matter is a pure passivity or pure possibility for form, what it calls eidos, and form in itself is the thing that is intelligible, that can be understood. So everything that can be conceived must be some kind of form. You can't have amorphous something.
Okay.
And this matter, in this mentality, the pure matter would be a pure nothing. Matter is dynamis. Dynamis means potency, possibility. Okay. That's where we get the word dynamic. Although note this is very interesting thing. When I say that somebody is dynamic, do I mean that he is passive or active? What do you say?
In the modern sense, we would say it is active, but in reality, the origin of the word was opposite.
Yes, original was opposite. In Aristotle, to be dynamis is possibility, and matter is always a possibility of form. Now, if you want to talk about what he called protehule, the first matter, the pure matter, that would be pure amorphous nothing. This is being without form. And interesting, in our day and age, when we talk about reality, we mean precisely this. This is not a kind of like a trick, a rhetorical trick I'm pulling here. We are really on the opposite side, because not we as a people, because human beings, in my opinion, have pretty well disposed mind. But the let's say academic notion or scientific notion moved into this direction, which is in fact wrong. And so this meme magic, this occultism, or this illusion shadow weaving, as I call it, that's Plato's term, skiagraphia. That's drawing of shadow. When you draw some figure and want to edit illusion of third dimension, then you add shadow. That's called skiagraphia in Greek. They are, in fact, they are trying to, what they would like to do eventually and finally would be to reform the world, or their world, in kind of like their own image. And in order to do this, the world for you would be this pure matter. So idea that occultism or such things has to do with anything spiritual is completely false, because it is an attempt to sink into this pure possibility of everything, pure passivity. And this is what matter in fact is. Matter is not the thing that is pushing back. When we hit our head against the wall, we know that wall is material because of the heat. This is not the matter. This is just the form that is not well disposed to my head. Matter is a different thing. And this kind of thinking and this illusion making is based on matter. And what is interesting, internet and in general digital technologies seem to be a stage where matter seems to really appropriate this liquid form. So internet is completely material. Everything is matter on internet, but it is a subtle form of matter.
I think of it more as ether. I'm going to stop you there for 1 second, because want to bring it back to the idea that, MIhai, you shared some stories there about thinking that you foresaw or you predicted the Fukushima disaster.
Yeah.
Now, one article that Branko wrote that I had difficulty with, and I still have difficulty with it, is about the synchronicity, because you went into it. And I suppose synchronicity for all of us, for some crazy reason, and maybe it's the internet, blah, 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 has become something more important than perhaps it is, But I have a lot of experiences that could qualify as synchronicity. For example, I just want to give you two, okay? But the first one is because I was just recently talking to a friend about this, right? Do you remember on 9/11, when 9/11 happened, I was actually in my house. I was teaching the children, but it was lunch break because it was 1:45 here when it happened at 8:45 there. And we had just finished lunch and I was cleaning the table, and it was a radio program. We didn't actually have very much electricity in that house. We had no toilet or running water. It was a very primitive house. But I had an old radio, and the radio started to say, a new show came on, and on the radio the man said, "And now we're going to speak to a man who is abused by a priest." And I just dropped my cloth, turned around on my heels, slammed the button on the radio, and I said out loud, "No more bad news today." And that was about 30 seconds before those planes went into the towers. But I made a conscious effort that whole day to listen to no radio, to hear nothing. And then my sister rang me that evening at 10 p.m. and she just said to me, "Well?" And I said, "Well, what?" And she said, "Are you like the last person on earth to know anything?" But I just thought it was interesting that moment of making a declaration happened at that moment. But that's only one story. I wanted to tell you another story which I found stronger, and it seems very occultic, even though I'm not really an occultic. I'm not involved in any groups or anything like that. But like one time, a very long time ago, my oldest son is 28, so he's just a little bit younger than you, MIhai. I was in town teaching a yoga class to a group of actors, and as the last few moments of the class came, there was this slanted window beside my head, so I'm sitting cross-legged, and this huge crow lands on the side of the window. The window is opened, and he's literally 18 inches away from my head, and he turns his eye towards me, and it was like a big glassy black ball, you know, and I looked into the eye, and I realized at that moment that something terrible was happening. And so I said a prayer, you know, I said, "Please God, you know," I just prayed, right, that something, whatever was happening, would be okay. And I drove home, and I found my son on the couch. He was only about 10 or 12, and he had at that moment been drowning in a lake, but his friend somehow reached down his hand and drew him up. So I came home having experienced that far away from that happening, and came home to find that it happened at the same time. And so it's very difficult to not see that there is some materiality or some reality in these experiences.
Yeah, you know, the crow is a symbol of death anyway.
I know that, yeah. The Morrigan.
Yeah. The raven.
The raven. And my husband's, my married name is the servant of the raven, you know, so there is I know the connection.
Yeah, you know, I think I know what you're saying, but I think we should perhaps here differentiate between two different phenomena. You know, one is they are at the two different poles. So synchronicity is the one which is down below, and there is a different one, you know, at the top, at the north pole, so to say, which it is called in Greek, they term it kairos, you know, which has many meanings. You know, one of them is the right time, but it is this moment when, let's say, a ray from above, from eternity, meets time, you know, meets the flow of time. So it may manifest in different ways. One of them is this receiving of signs, which I think that in this, for example, in this experience you had with the raven, I think that this was a God-given sign, especially because you know what your first impulse was to pray for whatever was happening. So when this effect takes place, now I think you can be pretty sure that it was something not illusory, not illusory in any sense, but really a divine sending in this case. So what I'm trying to say is that this synchronicity mimics it. Let's say it parodies this thing of divine. Let's say I cannot say divine visitation because this has other connotation. Let's say this moment, you know, this moment of divine light when you have this profound intuition, this really profound intuition, this luminous intuition into something which transcends time. But this synchronicity, I think, and Branko's article helped me a bit explain this phenomenon. This synchronicity is more like a mirror, you know, which you project upon the world. It's a mirror image of yourself you project about your surroundings, about the things surrounding you. You know, it is this sort of exercise that I think Carl Jung proposed, and many occultist groups have. You know, to treat your day, to go about your day as if everything you saw is like a dream, as if you are living in a dream. And whatever people you meet, whatever circumstances you experience during the day, they are like just dream images of your psyche, of different parts of your psyche. Of course, when you go out living your day with this particular outlook, it is not very healthy, because in that moment you practically sever the connection between your fellow man and yourself. You no longer regard them as persons, you know, as concrete persons whom are other from yourself, but you see the whole world as an emanation of yourself, of your own psyche. So in this case, the things we experience as synchronicity, I think, are just projections, delusional projections, which seem to, let's say, to have a life of their own. You know, they, like Branko said, they gain this borrowed reality. You know, it is like projecting a movie on a screen in front of you, and it seems like that projection, that image there, has a life in its own, has some deepness, has something which makes it real in itself, but it is not. Once you turn off the projector, the image goes away. And the same in this case with synchronicity.
It's reminding me the conversation earlier on as well, and now this about, there's a word called pareidolia, I think it's called, which is like pattern recognition. And the human brain is designed to recognize pattern recognition, because, for example, even with foods and stuff like that, you know, say if we were in the wild, we need to pattern recognize. So in a sense, the memes might be pattern recognition. The synchronicity might be just all forms of pattern recognition. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, yeah, Mihai.
No. I don't know what to say about this.
Maybe
I'm not sure also, because, but what you described, I have more or less nothing to add to what Mihai said. That's what I think too. But what you experienced, there's definitely different thing. Yeah, because I know my grandma, God rest her soul, she had a lot of such events in her life, and my brother also, and I to some extent. But they are always related to something important. I remember my grandma, when my father was a baby, she just woke in the middle of the night, took him from his bed and put him by her side. After a minute, the whole part of the ceiling fell on that bed. This is not synchronicity, this is something else. Because, yeah.
I just wanted to say that I have had so many of those exact same type of experiences, like especially connected with my children, you see. And like my grandmother also, she was a tarot reader. But yeah, when you wrote about synchronicity, it really kind of made me feel, oh God, like have I been just going around projecting myself into the world in some kind of crazy way? But it didn't feel like that, because they don't come invited, you know. It's not like...
Yes. Yeah. Now, in synchronicity, this term is just a mean of trying to explain this, and it turns everything upside down. Because I mean, Mihai more or less summed it up, what it is about, and it can give people an illusion. When you read Carl Gustav Jung, who was a very intelligent man, and he himself was prone to such experiences, that's the reason why he got into it, but on, I think, extremely wrong assumptions. And the main thing is this misunderstanding that this is something that we produce. No, we don't. This is the crux of the thing. Especially, I mean, somebody like Jung would not, or somebody who is accepting Jung's explanation, would not go on and pray when something like that happens, you know, because the idea why he researched synchronicity was to empower it, to create some kind what he called a creative imagination as a mean of a method of psychoanalysis, of a method of curing mental illnesses. I think that by this method you can only cause mental illness, and mental illness in not psychical but really mental illness, the deviation of mind, which is very dangerous. So I think, as MIhai said, we have to differentiate that.
If I may add something, this, and this is coming, from the experience of many of the desert fathers, the desert monks, I mean, and also in the writings of many church fathers, especially from the East. Now, you have this, you always have this criteria, by which we can differentiate between what is authentic, a sign of a higher intervention, of a higher experience, and what is just a projection or a delusion or something even worse than that. Now it is, like I said, it is always about, let's say, the effect it has on yourself. I mean, does it point your mind, or does it point you towards a direction higher than yourself? Does it direct your thoughts to God? Does it create a feeling of humility inside you? Or does it, let's say, exacerbate the ego? Does it make you feel like you are somehow controlling reality and that everything is about you? So, of course, I don't have to say that the first case is authentic, the second case, not.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I can give you one example. I won't go recounting something that occurred, not happened, but occurred to me. It was a process that was out of ordinary. And one thing that I noticed, some time have passed after this event, that I cannot utter a cuss word. So I cannot, I cannot swear. I completely lost, and it lasted for, I can swear now, don't worry, but
okay.
But never of God, because when Croats swear, the first thing you'll swear on will be Jesus, will be God, will be Moses, or something like that. And that's because people do believe in this, and then you always swear when you're really angry. You hit on the thing that is most holy. But after that happened to me, I noticed, those are things you notice, those are not things that flash on you in an instance, but they are process. I noticed I don't swear anymore. I can't bring myself to do this. And then by this, I realized this was something good. And this is how you discern those things. And you always they always take time. They are never an instant. Like, you have this flash of insight, what they like to call mystical experience. No. It takes time. It takes germination. It takes time to understand and to occur to you. And it's very gentle. Because I think everything that comes from above, to use this term, comes in this unassuming way. It is diffuse. It is gentle. Like pervading you, until you understand that you are completely enthralled by it, and it never makes radical changes, but slow and subtle changes that you recognize only after some times. I think this is how you can discern, are you on the right path or not. Whereas in these synchronicity things, people want to have effects, people want to make actions, do actions that will be to their benefit, and not seldomly to others. And you have this in the now they are using it in politics, trying to elect Trump by memeing him into office. So.
No, I wanted to say, to add something to what Branko said. Well, sometimes it may have this radical effect. It depends from case to case. I mean, let's say a holy experience or something like this. But this usually only comes for people who are able, to withhold such a radical change.
I have to say that when I was about 35, I went from one day from being completely normal to the next day. My whole life absolutely ruined by anxiety disorder that came out of nowhere. And it spent the next 10 years ruining my life for no reason that I saw it. And it was an extremely physical experience, like hundreds, maybe even thousands of electrical shocks every single day, for which I didn't take any medication or anything. But it meant that I stayed in my house for 5 years without going outside. And I certainly didn't wish for anything like that to ever come. I never sought it. But it did transform me, you know. So, some transformative things might be very unpleasant. They might be.
When I was talking about gentleness, that was only half of the story. That part you are talking about, oh yeah, that's a different thing. That dark night of the soul, that's something different. What I meant was the way how it starts to influence you, and this moment when some things in you get destroyed by it is extremely painful. That's a different thing. I was not meaning to exclude it from the story, but it just didn't occur to me to note it.
Well, you know, the thing is, of course, I am trying to speak not from my own mind on this, but from my own experiences, as well as from what I read in the Church Fathers. Now, we shouldn't equate, let's say, spiritual experience with what is pleasant. I mean, we should actually be more skeptical of pleasant experiences than of moments of crisis, because crisis, you know, it is in Greek it means judgment. So what I can say, or how I understand a moment of crisis, is a moment when let's say the light shines upon our lives, and then it reveals whatever is authentic, whatever is built on solid ground, and it also reveals in this process the sand castles and brings them down. And when you identify yourself with the sand castle and that goes down, you know, it is like what you took for reality gets destroyed. So of course the experience is painful at that moment, and you experience it as something not at all pleasant, and you would wish you wouldn't go through that. But when you look back after some years maybe, you see that it was beneficial for you, because from there you could start to build on solid rock, to build on a good structure, because and this is a reality, you know, you cannot, life is suffering, you know, you must go through suffering in life, and in the spiritual life, of course, that is unavoidable, because lots of the things we think about ourselves, or the identity we project and we say to us is our real self, it is just a pile of lies many times. So when that gets destroyed, of course, the first feeling you get out of that is one of a deep pain. You know, it doesn't have to be something related to let's say external circumstances. Others might not even notice about you a change. You know, you might be able to put on a mask so you can function in everyday life, but on the inside you feel yourself torn apart. And I think we shouldn't regard that as something necessary evil or something necessary bad. More often than not, it is a moment, like I said, of judgment through which we must go in order to purify ourselves from what is not true, from what is bad in ourselves, in order to be transformed for the better.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Branko, you want to say something?
No. There is not much I could add to that. I do, that I agree 100%.
To use an image of what I said, you know, let's say you are traveling, towards a certain city, but you must travel by night, and you are told to go through a very rough terrain, to climb a cliff or something like this, a mountainous terrain. And you spend that night, you know, falling down and injuring yourself many times, you know, and you maybe during that darkness, you think, okay, why God sent me through this? I mean, I could have followed that really
easy road.
Really easy road down there. You know, I saw that there was an easy road. Why do I have to go through this? What was the sense? And then, you know, when the sun rises and it is day once again, you easily see that below you that easy road was going for the precipice, and now you are really on the right path. You see the city in front of you. You know everything. You know all that pain you experienced during the night vanished. So this is how it is. This is from my of course limited experience. I cannot boast of something great, but this is how I would put it into image.
It's very useful. Yeah.
You know, this thing MIhai was saying, there is in this Eastern post-communist Europe, one might say that whole peoples went through this. I can speak for Croatia, for instance, because I am of the generation that is between two worlds. So this old world of modernity that was communist in our country, and it was a federal country of 6 republics, broke up in a week. It was gone. And I for one was never brought up. I was not brought up in communist family. I was not brought up in family that had very much belief into this system that was idealizing itself, that was built upon myths, in fact. But nevertheless, that was my reality, and I realized this when it started to fall apart, because everything that was built in communism, and this is really mysterious thing, falls apart. Some very good things, for instance, in Yugoslavia, occurred at that time. For instance, in music, in art, in the way the people lived. Because communism, once in power, it is extremely conservative. Because it cannot go nowhere. It is the economy that cannot progress or develop, and it's a political system that cannot reform itself. So they keep everything frozen. So whereas in Western Europe, you have this constant change that in the process destroys all forms of living, in communism they stay preserved. And everything that was preserved by communism, touched by communism, falls apart. And this is something...
I think the proper term would be, or more proper in my opinion, would be they are mummified during communism.
Yeah.
Can you put it like that?
I wouldn't call it... I would rather call it frozen or...
Frozen, it's the same thing. Actually.
Maybe zombified. Because we had an illusion of reality in communism. Not communist reality, but reality of even pre-communist times as were projected by communists. And when that fell apart, some people, me included, let's say, who were prone to look inside themselves, for better or for worse, started noticing that everything we held dear, almost everything, although I was not brought up in a communist environment at all, was completely insubstantial. And this is extremely painful. This is the trauma people are still passing through. Croatia is only now walking out from this trauma, because communism in itself was an attempt to make a break in history, and this break and recreate everything anew. And their method was the main method of communist revolution is mass murder. And this is something they always try to give some nice word to this, but it is based on killing, because you have to negate what was. They did this in Croatia on the pretext of killing fascists class for a very short period of time, because Yugoslav communism softened up very quickly. Yugoslavia was famous as not being, you yourself, Didre, was in the 80s in Yugoslavia. It was not, Romania was under Ceausescu, was much more hardline, although also relatively independent. Both countries were independent and even hostile towards Soviet Union. And for Yugoslavia, for Croatia, for instance, the thing was that people had a feeling that they are leading normal life and that communists will just vanish because everything is normal, nobody is taking the party seriously, even the party itself. But it was not like that. Nothing was normal. It seemed normal. You could lead very normal life, happy life, but it was not. Something was wrong. And to tell you the truth, I'm not so sure why, because it's incredible to me that everything that was created by that system, that everything that was essentially rooted in that system, no matter how good it was, just falls apart. This is something very mysterious about precisely communism. And as I said, this trauma of bringing down sand castles is something that happened on the mass scale in Eastern Europe, because everybody wanted to end communism. But deep down, they never realized that they will be ending 50 years of their lives also. And this is, and then you see this even on societal scale. So this is very interesting thing. So we East Europeans have this quirky mindset that is built from this kind. We kind of saw how it looks like when all those illusions of modern times fall apart, kind of like. Americans, I think, experienced that with this 9/11. That was the initial stage when their myths, things that kept them going, were broken, were brought down in 2 hours.
Yeah, and it's amazing how it was such a hugely symbolical act as well. You know, it was, you know, even in that sense, it was almost an occult act. Because, you know, what a way for an illusion to crumble. What a way for a society to move into a post-traumatic stress disorder.